why the Niners are meeting with so many wide receivers. Can you give the background a little bit? Like, they're meeting with a lot of wide receivers who are going to get taken pretty high in this draft.
Yeah, they've met with a ton, and they've actually had two now in for their top 30 visits. They had Jaden Reed from Michigan State. That's an interesting one. And Tavian out of Virginia, both in on top 30 visits. They met with Jonathan Mingo out of Old, who is, I think, as high as a third round prospect. So they've met with quite a few. So it's an interesting one, especially when you look at where the 49ers are, because they do have a wide receiver in Brandon Aiyuk who is kind of, be expecting, I think, a big payday here. So I think it's quite interesting, the number of people that they're looking at in terms of the wide receiver room.
Yeah. I sort of put two and two together with this when they signed Chris Conley. I'm thinking basketball. When they signed Chris Conley, I'm thinking, why is he here? Whose position does he play? He's not a flanker. He's not the kind of guy you'd put in motion or put in it or throw a screen to. I mean, he's the kind of guy you put on the line of scrimmage and ask him to run the routes that Brandon Aiyuk runs. And that reminds me, like, right, just because Brandon Aiyuk isn't being vocal and showy about it like Debo was last year, doesn't mean that there isn't a similar situation going. He did put out one tweet. He did make it clear that he's not particularly happy with his role in the offense. And he intends to prove that he's worth big money. At least that was the implication. So if the Niners feel like, look, man, you're a great player, but you're a very good player, but you're not a great player, and we're not going to pay you and Debo Samuel all this money, and we already picked who we want, so you got to go. I wouldn't be surprised. It's just not something they're going to broadcast.
Yeah, there's been some smoke around this already with Aiyuk. Maybe going in a different direction. There was the whole thing with the Giants, if you remember that, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And then the first thing that kind of caught my eye was Friday when they had the Cohn Treadwell was in for a look. They met with Conley and Treadwell at the same time. So that was the first thing for me that maybe tipped off that something's happening here with Aiyuk. People, Ayuk's one of their top receivers. So I think people look at that and they're like, hey, what are you talking about? That's crazy. But you start to look at the money around this team. They still have to sign Nick Bosa, and it's going to take a lot of money in that direction. And is Ayuk that you want to spend $15 to $20 million on moving forward? And that's, I think, the question that the 49ers need to be asking themselves right now.
Also, I mean, I think from their perspective, they're so committed to McCaffrey, Debo, and Kittle. Those guys are highly paid. They all demand a lot of targets. And from Aiyuk's perspective, he deserves a lot of targets too, but he just is fourth in the pecking order because of, financial reasons and all of that. If he were to go to another team, he might be happier. What the Niners want, like, they might say, you know what, we could trade Aiyuk and get a wide receiver who's bigger than him, faster than him, but doesn't demand as many targets and can be sort of like our big play X factor fourth threat. Like, maybe that's what they want. And if Aiyuk has outgrown that, they can get someone who's a little bit more explosive, who demands fewer targets. Maybe that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think, Aiyuk is somebody that could get them a second round draft pick. I think you look at Aiyuk, and he was taken at the end of the first round. I think they'd be happy if they can get a high second round pick for Brandon Aiyuk. That would put them right in play with some of these top offensive linemen, some of these top tight ends, and other people that are out on the market that they've been taking looks at. And so if they're going to jump up that high, I think that it's Aiyuk that they're going to have to use to do that, not Trey Lance. I know there's been a lot of talk around Trey Lance being traded during the draft as well. I don't think they can get up as far with Lance as they can with Aiyuk.
Aiyuk's worth a lot more because he has not missed a game in the last couple of years. He's a hell of a player. I agree. It seems like what the Niners could do if they really want to get a starting right tackle or a starting D end, someone that's way out of their range, they could trade Aiyuk. They could get that guy, although you got to be careful because that's kind of how you ended up with McGlinchey. But you could trade Aiyuk. You could draft someone in the end of round 1 or early round 2 and then take a wide receiver in round 3. I think that's kind of what they're looking at. Like, again, what Mike Conley was 5-6 years ago might be what all they need at split end. If you have Debo Samuel, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey, all you need is someone like Chris Conley, who's about 6'3", runs a 4.3, and you know he's going to get a couple shots a game, and you're worried about it, but he's not the focal point of your offense, and he doesn't. jump up and down and spin in circles and get upset if he doesn't get the ball. Maybe that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, or Danny Gray. Maybe Danny Gray is that
Danny
guy.
Gray.
They used that pick last year at the in the third round, and now they've had him in. You know, as the season went on last year, he did get a little more time on the field as the year rolled along. So maybe that's the play here. You move on from Brandon Aiyuk, you kind of promote Danny Gray because that's the guy who's kind of just been lingering out there. What's his role? Maybe the Friars envision his role as being the guy that takes over for Brandon Aiyuk. And so maybe that's where they decide to go in that direction. And they bring in another young guy now that can kind of still fill that role, but also maybe take over for Juwan Jennings next year.
Good point. Or maybe they're thinking Danny Gray plus a guy in a platoon to replace Brandon Aiyuk. Either way, I think what we're saying is as good as Brandon Aiyuk is, he's replaceable. I mean, frankly, the Niners don't have enough targets to go around. They're a run-first team. As Brandon Aiyuk said, right? They're a run-first team, and he's the fourth option. They don't have enough targets to go around. They're heavily invested in the other three guys. What they need is a big play guy to make the most of 3 targets a game, and that's not Aiyuk. Aiyuk should be getting 11, 12 targets a game. He could do a little bit of everything, but from what the Niners, how they've positioned their roster, I could see them saying, you know what, Brandon, go to the Giants. And one more thing. I can understand why they wouldn't make that trade yet. You might want to wait until you see who's on the freaking board before you trade, unlike last time when they traded for Trey Lance.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think that if that trade comes down, it's going to happen, you know,
Draft.
the day of the draft, or that round where they think they're going to pick that guy. It's going to happen in the middle of the draft. It's not going to be in the run up to it. It's going to be during the draft. And the point that you just made, that you brought up from Aiyuk and what he said there about how the number of targets, that makes a lot of sense. And that's, again, that's him. Aiyuk is a guy who doesn't talk a lot, and that says a lot. And then it's just a few words that he's saying. But when you're as quiet as Aiyuk is, when he moves that, I think people should really be paying attention to it, because that's kind of out of character for him.
He's quiet, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't have, I'm not going to say an ego, because I'm not trying to make it a negative thing, but he has, expectations, and he's earned things. And I think he's not just going to take a back seat to everyone else just because he's a swell guy. Like Debo's not that way. Kittle's not that way. McCaffrey's not that way. Ayuk's not that way. He's like them. That's all I'm saying.
I agree. What's that saying? Still waters run deep, or something like that. For the guys that are quiet.
Yes.
That's Brandon Aiyuk.